Hey everybody, what's going on? This is Sam from Historic Travels and welcome to another video. And as always, before we get started today, I'd just like to take a quick moment to welcome all my new subs and to thank everybody who's been leaving me comments and messages down below. Thank you all so much, I really appreciate it. And if you would like to take a couple of extra steps to help support the channel a little bit more, there's a merch store and a Patreon for this channel in the links below. Thank you all so much for all your support. Okay guys, so hey, as I'm sure you all know, we are quickly approaching the 110th anniversary of the sinking of the RMS Titanic. And as I was thinking about this and trying to decide what type of video I should make in order to properly commemorate the night that the Titanic went down, what I found myself thinking about is, what makes the story of the Titanic so famous to all of us today? I mean, some people will say it's famous because she was the biggest ship in the world at the time, she sunk on her maiden voyage, stuff like that. But to me, what makes the story of the Titanic so famous is the story of all of the heroes who were on board the Titanic that night, who did everything they could to save as many lives as possible. You've got the story of the officers up on the Titanic's deck who worked to lower the lifeboats. You've got the story of the engineers down below decks who worked to keep the power going. The story of the wireless guys trying to get a rescue ship to the Titanic. All of these guys played a huge role in saving lives on board the RMS Titanic on the night she sank. And honestly, you don't have to have played a huge role like these guys did in order to be considered a hero, at least in my mind. You know, to be considered a hero of the Titanic, at least to me, all you had to do is do something in order to save at least one life on the Titanic. And it could have been something so simple as just throwing deck chairs overboard, you know, or going down below deck to see if anybody was trapped below deck and needed help to get up to the deck, you know. By doing this, you are effectively helping save lives on the Titanic, and you are considered a hero to me. So, what I thought I would do in order to properly commemorate the night that the Titanic went down is to pick a few people on the Titanic who I would consider to be major heroes of the Titanic, and give you all a brief overview of their story and tell you all what they did in order to help save lives on the night that the Titanic went down. Now, just remember, guys, I only have time to pick a few people and give you brief overviews of their story. I don't have time to pick a ton of people. So just because I don't mention somebody doesn't mean I don't consider them to be a hero. It just means I didn't have time to make a huge video going over every single hero of the Titanic, because honestly, there were a lot of them on that night. Alright guys, well hey, without any further ado, let's now begin this video and tell the story of a handful of heroes who helped save lives on board the RMS Titanic on the night she went down.
The first hero of the Titanic that we're going to be discussing in this video is none other than Margaret Brown. Now, her friends at the time liked to call her Maggie, and if you're a Titanic enthusiast, you may know her by her historic name, the Unsinkable Molly Brown.
Margaret Brown was a first-class passenger on board the RMS Titanic. Now, in the months leading up to the Titanic's maiden voyage, Margaret Brown was actually staying in the city of Paris with her daughter. She was visiting her there in Paris. And while she was in Paris, she became aware that her oldest grandchild, who lived in Denver, Colorado, had become seriously ill. So upon learning this, Margaret Brown booked passage on the next vessel leaving for New York City. This ship happened to be the RMS Titanic. Margaret Brown boarded the Titanic in Cherbourg, France, and although she didn't know it at the time, by boarding the Titanic, she had just ultimately sealed her place in history.
However, just 4 days into the Titanic's maiden voyage, on the night of April the 14th, 1912, at 11:40 p.m., the RMS Titanic struck an iceberg on the starboard side below the waterline and slowly began to sink. Now, it didn't take Molly Brown very long to realize that something very serious had just happened to the Titanic. So, being who she was, she immediately decided to investigate to see what had just happened to the brand new revolutionary ocean liner.
You see, Molly Brown had a very outgoing personality. She wasn't the type of person to just sit back and wait while a crisis was going on, you know? She wanted to find out what the situation was, and then she wanted to do everything she could to help out. This is exactly what she did on the night that the Titanic sank. And boy, let me tell you, you definitely did not want to be on her bad side. If you were on her bad side, she would let you know about it, as one particular member of the Titanic's crew would soon find out. But anyway, after the Titanic had struck the iceberg, she was up on the deck pretty quickly trying to figure out what was going on, and she did everything she could to encourage as many people as possible to escape the Titanic in its lifeboats as the sinking of the ship continued to play out.
Now, it took some convincing, but eventually Molly Brown was persuaded to leave the Titanic in lifeboat number 6, which left the Titanic at roughly 1:10 a.m. Now, when this lifeboat was being lowered away, at least initially, everything seemed okay. However, not long after this lifeboat left the Titanic, something would happen in this lifeboat that would ultimately seal Molly Brown's place in history.
One of the first things that Molly Brown noticed with lifeboat number 6, as soon as it began to pull away from the Titanic, is that one of the Titanic's crewmen in that boat really didn't know what he was doing in terms of using an oar to row a lifeboat. She saw him really struggling with how to properly use the oar to row the lifeboat away from the Titanic. So upon noticing this, she said, "Hey, do you know what you're doing? And if you don't, I can handle it." So the crewman let Molly Brown take the oar, and that's what she did for the rest of the evening. She took that oar and she helped row the lifeboat away from the Titanic.
Now, the next major incident to happen to lifeboat number 6 occurred at roughly 1:55 a.m. At this time, Captain Smith walked out onto the port side boat deck of the Titanic and yelled through a speaking megaphone at all of the lifeboats currently in the sea to come back to the Titanic and pick up more passengers. Upon hearing this, Molly Brown then urged everyone in her lifeboat to help her row the boat back to the Titanic to rescue more people. However, this request by Molly Brown was met with fierce opposition from the crewman in charge of the lifeboat, Quartermaster Hitchens.
You see, Hitchens was worried that if he was to take his lifeboat back to the Titanic to pick up more passengers, then there was a serious risk that his lifeboat could be sucked down with the Titanic when the ship would eventually founder. Now, I'm going to judge this decision based on my point of view, and I'm also going to tell you all what I would do if I was in charge of lifeboat number 6 that night. So, based on my perspective, I kind of understand where Hitchens was coming from in regards to being concerned about the suction. However, what I would do differently is I would look at the Titanic, I would see how far gone she was, I would also try to judge how quickly she was foundering, and then I would base my decision on if or if not we should go back on that. So, if I was in charge of Hitchens at that current time, I would look at the Titanic and see it in pretty much the exact same state you saw it in that last animation. I would see the bow about to go under, and I would see how quickly the portholes were disappearing, and just try to judge how fast the Titanic was foundering. And honestly, in my opinion, I would think it would be safe enough to try to go back to the Titanic and pick up more people. However, that isn't what Hitchens did. Hitchens refused to even consider going back to the Titanic. And as you can imagine, this decision didn't sit well with Molly Brown. She protested, and eventually Hitchens got so fed up that he yelled at her. And he said, and I kid you not, he said, "No, we are not going to go back. It is our lives now, not theirs. Now row this boat." Now, as you can imagine, this still didn't sit well with Molly Brown, and it really annoyed her. But at this point in time, she didn't protest Hitchens' decision, and she continued to row this lifeboat away from the Titanic. However, as Hitchens would soon realize, this decision would soon come back to bite him.
Then, at 2:20 a.m. on the morning of April the 15th, 1912, RMS Titanic slipped beneath the surface, casting 1,496 people that were still clinging to the ship into the freezing cold North Atlantic Sea. After the Titanic went down, this is when the next major event with lifeboat number 6 and Molly Brown occurred.
After the Titanic went down, Molly Brown once again stood up in her lifeboat and told everybody in the boat that she wanted to go back into the area at which the Titanic sank and attempt to rescue some of the people who were screaming for help in the water. However, once again, this idea was quickly rejected by Quartermaster Hitchens, who once again screamed at her and said, "No, we cannot go back. They'll swamp the boat. We can't do it." However, at this point, Molly Brown had had just about enough of Hitchens, and she and him got into a huge verbal confrontation. And this whole fight basically ended with Molly Brown going, "If you don't shut up right now, I'm gonna throw you overboard." I mean, it's like I told you, you definitely do not mess with Molly Brown. She will not put up with it. So after this whole thing happened, Molly Brown did gain some control of the lifeboat, and her opinion did matter to all those in the boat. However, what happened after this is kinda he said, she said. It's not known if or if not this lifeboat did attempt to go back and rescue any more people in the water after the ship sank. However, what we do know is that because of her actions on the night that the Titanic sank, and because of everything that happened with lifeboat number 6, Molly Brown, or Margaret Brown, officially earned herself a place in history. And it's because of these actions that she is now known as the Unsinkable Molly Brown and is a true hero of the Titanic disaster. All right, everybody. Well, hey, I hate to do this to all of you, but I think I'm going to have to pause the video here and make this a multi-parter. The reason being is because it took me a lot longer than I thought it would to work on the Molly Brown story. And I'm going to be busy over the next couple of days, and I'm not going to have time to work on this video. So because of that, and due to the fact that I don't want you guys to have to wait a week and a half for another episode to come out, I decided to just release this as a multi-parter. So here's my ultimate plan for this Heroes of the Titanic series. It's going to be short, just a two-parter, and my ultimate plan was to tell the story of 3 different heroes on board the Titanic. Margaret Brown was one, and I've got 2 more planned. Can you guess which ones? Let me know what you think in the comments below. But anyway, my plan is to work on this video when I can, and I'm going to try to release the video before the 110th anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic. And there will be a live stream on that night to help commemorate the sinking of the Titanic and talk about the story of it and remember all of those who lost their lives. I hope to see you all there. Anyway, guys, so hey, I hope y'all enjoyed this video. Be sure to leave it a like, be sure to subscribe, and thank you all so much for all your support. I definitely could not do this without all of you. All right, everybody, well, hey, y'all stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a good night, everybody.
Special thanks to our Captain level Patreon supporters, Jeffrey Clayton, Dakota Charbonneau, Moosh, and Greg Gallick. Thank you all so much for all the support.